It started with a silence no one expected on Family Feud. The cameras were rolling, the lights were warm, laughter still echoing from the last round. And then Steve Harvey stopped mid-laugh. He looked up at the crowd, his smile fading slowly, like a curtain falling after the final act. On the third row, a father's hand trembled. Beside him, a mother was trying not to cry. And between them, two little girls, both holding a photograph. The studio went quiet. Steve stepped down from the stage. The producers froze. But Steve, he had already made his choice. Hold the game, he said softly, and a show that millions were watching became something completely different. Just 15 minutes earlier, everything was normal. Two families competing, laughter filling the air, the scoreboard flashing bright. Steve was at his best. Quick with jokes, sharp with timing, the perfect rhythm of comedy and control. But behind the cameras, a story was quietly unfolding. One of the contestants, Michael, had told the producers that this episode meant more than winning. His wife, Laura, and their two daughters, Sophie and Ella, had convinced him to come on the show after months of grief. They had lost someone, their eldest daughter, Grace, to leukemia 6 months earlier. Grace was 13. She had been the one who always wanted to meet Steve Harvey. The family had promised her they'd audition someday, and they kept that promise without her. Steve didn't know any of this when the show began. But Grace's picture had been placed right in front of the podium, a smiling face framed in pink. It wasn't supposed to be on camera, but Steve noticed. During the first round, Steve kept glancing toward that photo. Between his jokes, between the laughter, there was a flicker of something else, curiosity, maybe empathy, maybe recognition. When the camera panned across the audience, the little girls, Sophie and Ella, were clapping offbeat, trying to smile. Their hair bounced as they laughed, twin braids tied with mismatched ribbons, one pink, one yellow. Their mother whispered something only they could hear. "Smile, baby." Grace would want that. Steve caught that. He didn't know what it meant, but he felt it. By the second round, he walked closer to the family's podium. He leaned in, looked at the framed photo, and asked, "Who's this young lady right here?" Laura hesitated. Her lips trembled. "She's our daughter," she said softly. "She passed away this year." Steve froze. For a second, the entire studio forgot they were making a game show. He put down his cue card. Steve looked into the camera and said, "Sometimes we think this show is about laughs, but today it's about love." He turned to the audience, then back to the family, and walked straight off the stage. The audience gasped. The producers panicked. But Steve didn't care. He walked down, microphone still in his hand, and kneeled beside the two little girls. "Your sister loved this show, huh?" he asked gently. Ella nodded. Sophie held out a folded paper. "She wrote this before she got sick. She wanted you to read it." Steve took the note, his hands shaking slightly. He opened it. Inside were 4 words, written in a child's handwriting. "Keep laughing, Mr. Steve." For a long moment, no one breathed. Steve slowly took off his jacket, the cream-colored one he'd been wearing all season, and wrapped it around Sophie's shoulders. "That's yours now," he said softly. "You remind me why I do this." The jacket became the story's heartbeat. A piece of Steve, a promise of warmth that outlived the moment. He looked up at the audience again. "Life ain't about the prizes," he said. "It's about what we give when no one's watching." Then he turned back to the girls. "Your sister's laughter. It's still here." The crowd rose to their feet. No applause cue, no direction, just spontaneous humanity. Even the rival family walked down from their podium to hug the grieving parents. As the applause swelled, Steve stood quietly, tears in his eyes. He held the note in one hand, the microphone in the other, but for once, he didn't need to speak. The studio lights dimmed slightly, framing the family in a soft halo. A camera caught the shot, the jacket, the note, the photo of Grace. In that moment, Family Feud became a cathedral, not of faith, but of shared pain and healing. Weeks later, Steve shared that moment in an interview. He said, "That day changed me. I stopped worrying about being funny. I started worrying about being real." He kept a copy of Grace's note in his wallet, and every time he walked on stage, he touched it before the lights came up. "Keep laughing, Mr. Steve." for words that redefined a man's mission. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. As the credits would roll, Steve's voice would return one last time. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After that day, nothing in the studio felt the same. When the lights came up the next morning, every single person, from the cameraman to the production assistants, moved a little slower, spoke a little softer. The walls that had once echoed with constant laughter now carried something different: reverence. Steve arrived early. No suit jacket this time. He wore a simple shirt, holding his cue cards under one arm. But his eyes, they carried the weight of something sacred. The crew greeted him quietly. No one wanted to break the silence that moment had left behind. He sat on the edge of the empty stage, staring at the audience seats where that family had sat. He remembered the way Sophie's small hands had trembled as he wrapped his jacket around her shoulders. He remembered Ella's voice, small but steady, as she said, "Grace used to laugh at all your jokes." Steve closed his eyes. That sentence wouldn't leave him. He had built a career on laughter, on perfect timing, punchlines, and control. But for the first time in decades, he realized laughter wasn't the destination. It was the bridge, a way to reach the heart when words alone couldn't. That night, Steve went home and placed a new frame on his office desk. Inside was a photo, not of himself, not a trophy or award, but of that family on the stage, standing under the soft studio lights. Behind them, the Family Feud logo glowed like a halo. He kept that photo there, beside his Bible and a small notebook filled with quotes he'd written over the years. The next episode he filmed, something subtle but unmistakable had changed. He still cracked jokes, still made the audience laugh, but between rounds, he listened more deeply. When contestants talked about their families, their struggles, he didn't rush to the next question. He lingered. He let their stories breathe. And soon, something began to happen. Letters started arriving at the studio. Hundreds at first, then thousands. Parents, widows, children, people who had faced loss, sickness, loneliness. They wrote about how that single episode had changed the way they saw television, or even life itself. One letter read, "Mr. Harvey, you made me believe that kindness can be louder than applause." Another said, "My son passed away last year. Watching you kneel with that family helped me remember that love never leaves. Thank you for reminding me how to laugh again." Steve read every one of them. He stacked them carefully in a wooden box labeled Grace. 6 months later, the producers invited the family back, not for television, but for something private. No cameras, no audience, just Steve, the crew, and the family standing in the quiet studio. Sophie had grown taller. Ella carried the same folded paper in her pocket. Laura and Michael looked stronger somehow, still broken, but rebuilding. Steve met them at center stage. He smiled softly. "I kept her words," he said, pulling out the note from his wallet. "They've been with me every show since." Laura's eyes welled up. Michael shook Steve's hand and said, "You didn't just honor her. You healed us." Then the two little girls handed him something wrapped in tissue paper. When Steve unfolded it, he saw a tiny golden pin shaped like a smile. On the back, engraved in small letters, were the words, "For keeping your promise." Steve's voice broke as he said, "I'll wear this every day." And he did. From that moment on, the small golden pin gleamed just below the pocket of his suits, a secret tribute that millions would never notice, but one that meant everything to him. Over the following years, producers noticed something else. Family Feud's tone evolved. It still made people laugh, but now, every episode carried an undercurrent of heart. The show's motto became more than a slogan. It became a mission, to remind people that families aren't just defined by blood, but by the love they share in the hardest of times. Steve began mentoring young comedians differently, too. When they came to him asking how to be funny, he would say, "Don't chase the laugh. Chase the truth. Make him feel something first, and the laugh will come." In private, Steve often returned to that studio seat, the one where Sophie and Ella had sat. He'd stand there for a while before every new season, whispering quietly, "This one's for you, Grace." Sometimes, when the cameras were off, he'd tell the story to the new interns or crew members who hadn't been there that day. He'd tell it not as a tragedy, but as a testament. He'd say, "There will come a moment in your life when you'll have to stop the show, when the script won't matter, when the lights won't save you, and the only thing that will matter is how much heart you have left to give." He'd look them in the eye and smile. That's the real show. That's the one worth hosting. Years later, when Sophie graduated from college, she sent Steve an invitation and a photo. In the picture, she was wearing a cream-colored jacket, his jacket, still perfectly preserved. On the inside pocket, she had embroidered the words, "Keep laughing, Mr. Steve." He framed that too, because now, the story wasn't just about loss. It was about continuity, a cycle of kindness handed down through laughter. And whenever Steve walked on stage after that, the lights felt a little warmer. The applause felt a little deeper. Because somewhere between the noise and the silence, between the laughter and the tears, Grace's voice was still there, whispering through every smile, echoing through every heart she never met, teaching everyone what it really means to laugh and to love. And in that quiet space between jokes, Steve Harvey finally understood. That laughter was never the end of the story. It was the language of healing itself.